Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our series on introductory syntax. I'm not going to wear the mask this entire time, but I thought I would wear it just to remind everyone to try to be safe during this crisis, and also to show it off because I think it's really fun. It's got starfish. It's cool. Anyway, I obviously don't need it since I'm at home by myself. Well, I've got the animals here. So today I want to close off our discussion of WH movement. We're going to talk about some cross-linguistic variation. This is going to move into a little bit of some stuff that is a little bit more advanced. And we're really not even going to get into being able to analyze this. So we're going to leave with some open questions. But it'll leave us some things to ponder. This is going to build really extensively off of what we talked about last time. And we're probably not going to do too much in terms of the sort of technical analysis. This is going to be more about sort of big picture discussion. But I want us to think about some sentences. We're going to start with these two English sentences. Who did you see? So obviously that's a WH question in English. It's a content question. To respond to that question, you would respond with a person or a list of people. But when you ask that question, you are asking for a solicitation of content. So you're asking for you're needing to know some new novel information. And we can compare that to what I have marked here with a hashtag, you saw who. And this is what we refer to as an echo question in English. It's grammatical, but it doesn't have the same pragmatic force. It doesn't serve the same function as a standard WH question in English. So the contextual usage of a echo question in English is distinct. So we use these in contexts where we are either needing to repeat information. So we just didn't hear. So someone says, "Hey, I saw Seligum," and you're like, "Wait, you saw who? I just didn't hear you." Or we're incredulous about that information. So you saw Brad Pitt. Wait, you saw who? Like, you just can't believe that you saw Brad Pitt at the Carbondale Mall, because that's obviously a lie. Brad Pitt was not at the Carbondale Mall. So those two things, that's obviously a different thing than when you say, "Who did you see?" For some reason, I'm just very reminded right now of all of the articles about Joe Exotic and how Joe Exotic had brought tiger cubs to the Marion Mall several years ago. So for those of you that are watching from other places, my university is in Carbondale, Illinois, and about 20 minutes away there's another town, Marion, and Joe Exotic, if you're not familiar, is the subject of that Netflix series that everyone was watching to survive the couple weeks of the pandemic. So but the key thing with these sentences is that so you saw who has some elements of that yes no question or of that WH question, but it doesn't it isn't that same content question that we would ask in English. So it really is just when we're asking these questions, we're asking for a repetition of information that was already provided in the discourse. And this is really critical for us when we start comparing these to other cross-linguistic questions, because what we want to see is that these do not behave the same way in other languages. So in particular, I want to compare this to the pattern that we see in Mandarin Chinese, where in Mandarin we get the same pattern as the English echo question, with the WH element staying low. The WH element remains what we're going to refer to as in situ. So, and I'll write that term up on the whiteboard in a second here, but it remains in its sort of original either theta or case position, and it doesn't move into a WH position. But critically, these questions are interpreted in the same way as our English content questions. They can also be used as echo questions. So can, with the right pragmatic force, you can also use or sort of prosodic force, you can also use a content question in English as a type of echo as well. So someone says, I saw Brad Pitt. You're like, who did you see? It's not to say that echo is the only way to express incredulity. I have some trouble with that word. My dog is really a little bit unhappy today. I think we got a package earlier. So what's critical here is this WH element is remaining low, but it is receiving the same interpretation as if it were raising. And this actually follows from the same type of discussion that we had in the last video with those quantifiers. And the idea that we're going to discuss is, and I luckily didn't erase, is this. We have our model of grammar, which holds that we have the deep structure, which is where we compute our X bar rules. It's where we develop our where the theta structure is applied, and then we apply certain movement operations. And in English, we overtly move WH words. We're going to see in a second here that we can actually find another paradigm where English doesn't seem to obey to the same degree we can find in other languages. That there's even a broader pattern that English doesn't seem to follow. But English must move at least one WH word to satisfy the formation of a content question. Where a language like Mandarin Chinese leaves those down low. Now, this is the same thing that we saw with English quantifiers, where English quantifiers stay in their base positions. They're either their case positions, really their case positions. They stay in their case positions. But then at this step, the movement between surface structure and LF, they raise. So what we're seeing here is that languages have cross-linguistic variation. So languages like English will apply at this in between the deep structure and the surface structure, but Mandarin WH will apply between surface structure and LF. And I want to complicate this picture just a little bit more, but as I said, we're not going to necessarily be able to do these in our trees, but I can give you some hints as to how we might be able to do some of this. So one of the patterns that we can find that we might be able to notice is, again, if we think about English sentences that have multiple question words. So let's say we're having a party. I know in this current state of general isolation, that's maybe a little bit of a fantasy, but if we were having a party, we might say, oh, who brought what? Now, this question, this who brought what, these are list pair questions. They're because we're matching between the who's and the what's. And you can even embed that the question. So John, let me try to do this on the fly. So so who brought what? Who did John say brought what? So let's say we're getting a report from John about who brought what to the party. Weird context, but we can see that we're moving that lower who in up into our as a question word. So it is raising. In that initial example. Because we're dealing with a subject question word, we're not seeing that overt movement, but we do see it when it's part of an embedded question. So we can see that there's some movement there. But what's critical there is that what isn't moving. But notice that what is still behaving like a content question, as if it were moving. In that same sort of general sense. So it's not behaving in that echoey sense that we saw earlier. It's not behaving like John brought what? Like, we're not getting that sort of outrage or mishear sort of reading. We're getting a content style read. So one hypothesis is perhaps it needs to raise in the same way. And so one piece of evidence that we might find for this is, well, are there languages that do things like this? And in fact, there are. In fact, it is generally a property that we find in the Slavic languages, with some interesting variation within this. But I'm going to give you two examples, one from Polish and one from Bulgarian, where we find what we know as multiple WH. And what's interesting about these examples is there's variation across the Slavic family. In particular, Bulgarian seems to pattern slightly differently than the rest of the Slavic family with respect to multiple WH, in that it allows it allows multiple WH even through islands, like we talked about last time, though we do see some variation among speakers in other languages. But the example here, so here's our Polish example, who what did, and here is our Bulgarian example, who whom sees. And these are roughly analogous to English examples, who did what and who sees who. But notice that these require the stacking of the multiple of these WH elements. There are some restrictions on these that seem to be largely morphological. So if you have identity of the WH elements, they tend not to be allowed to be next to each other, and there's other restrictions that emerge. But in general, the Slavic languages like to have their WH words pulled to the front, especially when they're part of a single matrix. So what we can learn from this is that there seems to be sort of maybe a three-part breakdown. That there are languages like Mandarin, which leave all of their WH words in C2. There are languages like English, which say, okay, well, I'm going to move one of my WH words, the highest WH word, to the highest specifier, or the specifier of the CP that has the plus WH. And then there are languages like many of the Slavic languages that say you've got to move them all with a bunch of restrictions. I'm massively simplifying the story that's happening in Slavic. Slavic is there's cross-linguistic variation. There's a lot more to the story going on in Slavic, but the core idea is that we can sort of generate a basic typology of these three different categories. But fundamentally, the core idea is that perhaps at the end of the day, all three are at work at LF. I mean, that the third, that's what I meant to say, is that really at the end of the day, all of these, all languages are behaving like the Slavic languages, that we're raising our WH words when possible to the matrix or to the CP that has that plus WH. So yeah, this one is a little bit more theoretic, a little bit more advanced, but the core idea is that if we think about it, is that movement operations exist even when we don't see them. And that movement syntax has an effect on semantics even after the syntax sort of sends off something to be pronounced. That's sort of the core concept that we're trying to get across here today. So I would like to close off with a quote, and unfortunately, the quote I had pulled up got accidentally shut down. So I'm gonna pull something else out. Just pull that back up. I apologize for this. So the quote I want to use today is from the poet Rilke, and I know it. I was drawn to it because I know a lot of people are kind of struggling right now, given the sort of ongoing global crisis, and I thought this one was just a kind of a nice sort of summation of sort of much of what we're dealing with. There are no classes in life for beginners. Right away, you were always asked to deal with what is most difficult. And I know maybe that one doesn't provide as much comfort, but I think it is just a nice summation of what we're dealing with, and a nice reminder that these are that we've been through these types of things before, and so hopefully there's some comfort in that, perhaps. I will see you next time, and I hope you all remain well and happy.